Okay. Thank you for your time. The questions I'm going to ask were formed by a group of Chicago teens who are interested in addressing and starting a dialogue about topics most important to our peers, neighborhood, community, Chicago, and etc. We are still in the process of gathering feedback/data related to some of our questionnaire topics, and your answers and opinions are very important parts of this process. At the end of this survey, please give us feedback on how to improve this process for future interviews and suggest questions that you would like us to ask your community.
Okay.
Okay. You ready? You can state your name and your relationship.
Latoya Montgomery, and I'm your aunt.
Okay. Where are you from?
From Chicago.
Which neighborhood?
Inglewood.
How long have you lived in Chicago?
48 years.
What role do you play in your community?
I'm a law-abiding citizen in my community.
Follow-up question. What is your definition of community?
Community is a group of people who live in an area who look out for one another, share common goals, and that was my definition of a community. I don't feel like I live in a community anymore. I did as a child growing up. Well, the reason I say that is when I was growing up, it felt like a community. Like our
As far
parents.
as what?
The kids in my community all went to the same school. We walked to school together. We walked home together. We went to the park district together. We came home from school. We did our homework. We did our house chores. And if my family finished with our house chores before the Forrests did, we went to help the Forrests, therefore help the Miles, which allowed all of us to go to the park district together almost every day.
Mm-hmm.
And we would all come home together. And for the parents that didn't work, they watched over the kids in the community. They reported to the parents about their children's behavior. And we don't have that anymore.
Okay, so basically everybody worked together.
Yes.
Okay.
And they looked out for one another. And they helped one another. If someone was laid off, neighbors cooked, neighbors helped took care of the kids. But we don't have that. I don't feel like I live in a community. I live in a neighborhood, not a community.
Okay. If you could change anything about your community, what would it be?
Foremost would be employment for the youth as well as adults. I would change the fact that they're constantly closing schools in my community, my black community. I may have 3, 4 grammar schools that have closed in a 10-block area, and we may have 2 or 3 new schools built in a Latino area.
So
I would change the gang violence and the drug use. I would eliminate the liquor stores, some of them. That's what I would change about my area.
So you do have, what's your closest school over here?
Our closest high school is John Hope College Prep. The closest grammar school, which is 2 blocks south from my house within walking distance, has been closed down for several years now, to the point where I've forgotten the name of it.
Mm-hmm.
The nearest grammar school is 55th and Morgan, I believe.
Oh, so we even got one
No,
around the block.
no. We'd have to catch a bus. I have to catch a bus to take my grandkids to school. Sometimes 2 buses.
Yeah, that's not good at all.
Nope. Should not be like that.
How do you think your community is viewed by others?
I think my community is viewed by others as violent, which there is some violence by what the media portrays. I've seen some good in my community also. I've lived in this community about 13 years now.
The first thing you think of is this Inglewood, right?
Yes,
The
I'm
first
in
thing
Inglewood.
you think about Inglewood, and the first thing you hear, you just think about shootings and people dying. That's the only thing you associate with Inglewood. Is
That's
it
right.
somewhere you don't want to be at?
True. But there are people who live here every day and they feel secure and they don't experience any violence. Or they might hear the violence, but it's not as much as the media tries to portray. I've lived here for 13 years. I would say the first 2 years I moved here,
Mm-hmm.
It was very violent. I did not go out other than to go to work and come home.
So you think,
I've seen the changes in my neighborhood.
so you think the
And
media gives off a bad perception of Inglewood? It's like it's too much. It's just like being one-sided about how your community is.
Yes, because just like they report the violence, they could report the good that go on in the neighborhoods, also in the community. They could report what the churches are doing. They could report when there's like what's going on with the Boys and Girls Club or the YMCA. Things positive. They could report positive things just like they report the negative things also.
Mm-hmm.
And considering the fact that I live in this neighborhood and actually now walk through this neighborhood, at one point I didn't. I see more good than I do bad. But I only hear the bad from the media.
Okay, D. But do you think there's a way that the image of your community could be changed, like the way people view your community? Is there a way for basically, well, I guess you would say the news as well, just like you said earlier.
I think if they reported
Right.
a nice balance, because there is a balance, I think that would change the views of others of how they view our neighborhood.
You think the news would be that outlet for that to happen, for them to see that it isn't as bad as it's made out to be?
Yes.
Okay.
The news, the social media, a lot of what you see and read on social media come from the news.
Yeah.
And if the news is unbalanced and unfair, then that's what they're discussing. They're only discussing on social media what they see and hear from the news stations,
Mm-hmm.
I think.
All cities have to deal with issues like violence. How does the issue of violence in Chicago compare to other major cities?
I don't know, because I don't live in those other cities. I watch the news also, and I see and hear about violence going on in their communities, but I couldn't say how it compared. I couldn't say what their death rate is or
Mm-hmm.
suicide rate is or any of that. So I can't really compare.
Okay. What are the 3 top issues/concerns that you would like to address and start a dialogue with your community, peers, neighborhood, Chicago, etc. about? Top 3 issues.
Top 3 issues is unemployment, school closings, and drug use. Those are my top 3.
Okay. Where are we? If you were in charge of the media, what would you show? What would you do to change the perception of how people view you in your community? We basically talked about this already.
Basically.
Okay, let's move forward. How do you see Chicago in the future?
I'm not sure what my vision of Chicago is in the future.
Like, do you feel like the people will come together and change some of our major issues and be one and not be so divided? Or do you feel like it's going to go downhill from here in this current leadership and things of that nature?
I hope for improvement. I really do. But at the same time, no matter how negative Chicago is portrayed throughout the media, Chicago is still the #1 tourism city in the United States.
Mm-hmm. So
everyone comes to Chicago.
Right. Can't be that bad.
So it cannot be as bad as they're saying it is. Otherwise, no one would come here. The amount of money Chicago makes off tourism is massive. And I know that because I've worked in the hospitality industry. And I see it. They come from far and wide for several reasons to Chicago. They want to see Navy Pier. They want to go to Coachella. They want to go to the Blues Fest. Chicago is the #1 destination.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say the majority of the people visiting here are not being, they're not experiencing violence.
Okay, that's your answer?
Yes.
Okay. So, do you have any additional thoughts, comments, questions, or anything that you feel I should have asked you?
No, I think we covered it pretty good.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.